Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the absolute most chilling and, frankly, most fascinating legends in modern history, the mystery of the Mothman. We're going to explore the weird origins of this myth, the actual science behind it, and the very real, devastating tragedy that permanently etched it into the history of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. It's a story where folklore, psychology, and history all kind of collide in a major way. Right, let's dive straight into this. Imagine it's the late 1960s. You're driving down a dark, quiet road outside of town with some friends, and you see something completely out of a nightmare. That's exactly what happened to two young couples, and it kicked off an absolute frenzy. They described this creature as a large flying man, and get this, they explicitly said it had a massive 10 to 12-foot wingspan. So that brings us to Section 1, Birth of a Legend. The hysteria begins in Point Pleasant. Because that one single sighting, it was about to turn this quiet, outdoorsy town into the absolute epicenter of a massive, unexplained phenomenon. It's crazy to think about the timeline here, because it's so incredibly condensed, spanning just over a single year, starting in November of 1966. The town of Point Pleasant reported well over 100 terrifying encounters to local authorities. I mean, you had people claiming they saw it while driving, others swearing it was right in their front yards, and it all just kept building until reaching a sudden, horrifying climax on December 15th, 1967. You know what really gets me, though? It's the consistency. When you look at the first-hand accounts, witnesses repeatedly describe the exact same thing: a towering humanoid figure somewhere between 8 and 9 feet tall, moving in these incredibly swift, unsettling ways. And the most haunting detail for sure, the glowing red eyes. Witnesses swore that even in the pitch dark, you could see those eyes. It basically became a ghost hovering on the periphery of the whole town's collective consciousness. Moving on to Section 2, Encounters and Explanations, Fact, Fiction, and the Unknown. Because at this point, we really have to ask the logical questions. Where on earth did this monster come from? And how do we objectively explain that sheer volume of sightings? Well, a really crucial point to consider is the stark contrast between the fantastical accounts of terrified witnesses and the grounded biological reality of local wildlife. Skeptics rightly point out that you can explain a lot of this through simple misidentification of large birds. Take the sandhill crane. It has a wingspan of up to 7 feet and features that actually align pretty closely with what people described. Or it could have been giant local owls reflecting light to look like those glowing red eyes. But here's the catch. The people of West Virginia are avid outdoorsmen, hunters, fishermen, people who really know the woods. And they argued vehemently that they knew the difference between a local owl and a 9-foot humanoid, which, of course, just deepened the whole mystery. As the panic grew, the explanation sort of fractured into 3 distinct camps. First, there's the biological theory we just talked about, misidentified cranes and owls. Second, things took a sharp sci-fi turn with the extraterrestrial theory, where people literally started claiming UFO connections. And third, the psychological theory. This one suggests that hoaxes, mass hysteria, and underlying community anxieties were essentially fabricating a monster out of thin air. Expanding on those psychological and extraterrestrial theories, you really have to remember the context of the era itself. The 1960s were a time of massive social upheaval and cultural shifts in the United States, and that anxiety manifested in some pretty wild ways. Multiple witnesses who saw the creature claimed they were later intimidated by mysterious individuals resembling the classic Men in Black. Plus, winged humanoid creatures with red eyes? Those represent deep archetypal fears found in cultures worldwide for centuries. So what happened in Point Pleasant might just have been a modern manifestation of age-old folklore, totally adapting to the anxieties of a rapidly changing nation. Which brings us to Section 3, the Silver Bridge Tragedy, December 15th, 1967. The eerie atmosphere and all those bizarre sightings were suddenly eclipsed by a very real, very grounded disaster, one that completely silenced the town and brought the Mothman hysteria to a devastating halt. 46. That is the number of people who tragically lost their lives on the evening of December 15th, 1967. On that fateful evening, the Silver Bridge, which was this vital artery connecting Ohio and West Virginia, was heavily laden with rush hour traffic. Suddenly, completely without warning, the bridge just gave way. Cars plunged directly into the icy waters of the Ohio River below. Rescuers rushed to the scene to face a truly grim reality. It was a completely devastating event that sent shockwaves through the community, leaving an indelible mark on Point Pleasant forever. Section 4, Seeking Meaning in Disaster. engineering flaws versus supernatural curses. In the immediate aftermath, a grief-stricken community was just left grappling for answers. I mean, how could this happen? This desperate search for a why led to two drastically different explanations for the tragedy. From a scientific standpoint, the official engineering investigation provided a purely technical narrative. The collapse was cleanly attributed to material fatigue and stress. The catalyst? A single 55-foot-long eye-bar in the suspension chain fractured. That caused the pin holding it in place to become dangerously loose, which immediately triggered a catastrophic structural chain reaction, pulling the entire bridge down into the river. But, the human psyche often rejects cold technical facts when faced with immense trauma. While the scientific explanation was incredibly sound, rumors started to swirl that the Mothman had been seen hanging from the Silver Bridge the very night before the disaster. The sheer proximity of the sightings to the collapse led some locals to blame the disaster on a supernatural death curse brought by the creature. The Mothman wasn't just a monster in the woods anymore. He was now viewed by some as a literal omen of impending doom. And this is exactly why the myth has endured so powerfully over the years. The legend of the Mothman served as a profound psychological coping mechanism for the town. It's a fundamental human tendency to seek meaning, to look for connections, when faced with something as senseless as a bridge collapsing during evening rush hour. By associating the disaster with a supernatural harbinger, it gave a form and a face to an otherwise completely faceless, random tragedy. So that brings us to Section 5, the Mothman legacy, folklore, identity, and remembrance. Today, the story of Point Pleasant represents this really delicate, enduring interplay between historical fact, engineering failure, and cultural folklore. Over the decades, Point Pleasant hasn't hidden from this bizarre chapter of its history. They've actually completely embraced it. They erected a prominent metallic statue of the Mothman right in the middle of town, complete with those glowing red eyes. They host an annual festival that brings in thousands of enthusiasts and skeptics alike. So over time, the Mothman has evolved from a terrifying monster to a bit of a pop culture cryptid. But importantly, and this is absolutely crucial, this myth remains deeply and respectfully entwined with the somber memory of those 46 lives lost on the Silver Bridge. It's an acknowledgement of both their incredibly unique folklore and their shared grief. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I leave you with this final thought to ponder. Was the Mothman a genuine, undiscovered entity lurking out there in the West Virginia woods? Or is the Mothman actually a mirror, a profound reflection of our own human anxieties, our vulnerability in changing times, and our desperate need to find some sort of meaning in the face of absolute tragedy? It's a mystery where history, psychology, and folklore will honestly always remain beautifully and hauntingly intertwined.